Hello, everybody, and welcome. Welcome back to the final session in the STAR Center's summer webinar series, Administrative Strategies to Reduce Burnout. This week, we'll wrap up the series with a discussion of self-care. My name is Mariah Blake, and I'm the program manager here at ECU. I'm joined on the line once again by our fantabulous presenter, Lisa Hardmeyer-Gray, and this week's guest speaker, Patty Handler. I have a few quick things to go over before we let Lisa take over. Let me just get rolling here. Once again, a little reminder, ECU, the Association of Clinicians for the Underserved. We're a national nonprofit focused on recruitment and retention of clinicians in underserved areas. We're always striving to improve the care for our underserved communities, and we hope that this webinar series has been helpful for you and your teams to strengthen your ability to provide effective care. This series has been brought to you by our STAR Center project, which provides training and technical assistance and resources to help health centers improve their recruitment and retention strategies. The website you see on our screen here, chcworkforce.org, is where you can find all of our tools, reports, handouts, and recordings of webinars such as this, all there for free for you. So please take some time and visit that after this webinar. Like I said, my name is Mariah Blake, and I'll be handling the technical side of today's webinar. So if at any point you have technical issues or a question, just shoot me a question in the questions box in the GoToWebinar panel on your screen. You can also chat to everybody on the line in the chat box. And you can also email me at mblake@clinicians.org if for some reason you're cut off, and I'll try and troubleshoot with you off the line here. If you have any questions that you'd like to follow up with our presenters after today's webinar, please feel free to email myself at my email there, or Suzanne Spear, who's our Director of Workforce Development, and we'll try and get you pointed in the right direction. One final bit of info here. We are recording as usual, so we'll have this ready for you to review in a day or two on our YouTube channel, and we'll also email that out to everybody who registered for this afternoon's event. Please feel free to ask questions. If you have something immediate, I'll try and help you while we're going, and we'll save content for a longer discussion towards the end of our session today. I'll direct those to the speakers when we get to the close of their presentation. Have fun, ask questions, and I think we're all set. So Lisa, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Mariah, and thank you everyone for joining us for this last of our 5-part series. It's been such a pleasure to convey this information to you in any way that is helpful for you personally and for the people on your team that work so hard to bring such important care to, our most needy populations. And so this particular episode is one that's near and dear to my heart, as is this whole topic. Having been kind of in the trenches for 3 years doing the day-to-day work of being a counselor, therapist, behavioral health person in a community health center, really trying to juggle the balance of job, family, social life. It isn't easy. And so what I really try to pull together today is workshops that I've had, research that I've done, things that I've felt have been particularly helpful. And I want to share with you some things I wish I would have done a little more of. So this isn't my personal journey, but definitely has a personal touch to it. And then I want to introduce Patty Handler from Elan Experiences. Patty is a professional development coach, and she takes people like you and me who are kind of on the edge of burnout or maybe already there, and works with them in groups and individually to find different ways to take care of themselves so that they can continue the work that they do. Patty, do you want to say a little bit more about yourself, and then we'll kind of get going?
Sure, thank you, and thank you for inviting me onto this really important self-care program. My name's Patty Handler. If you're wondering about my accent, I always have to mention that so it doesn't interrupt the flow. I'm English, I'm Australian, I'm New Zealand, and now I live here in Seattle, Washington. My passion has been for the last 30 years is really helping in the personal development section. And I've gathered together through many years of experience. I was really a professional chef, so I really know about burnout. I know the intensity of work and what that entails. And from that, I gathered tools myself to help in my own self-care so I could maintain some level of sanity in the midst of a pretty insane world. And I have focused my entire last number of years in life coaching, personal development, exploration to find every technique possible to help my clients find equilibrium in their work world.
Thank you. So we're really excited to have Patty. She's been an inspiration to me, and I think she'll share some things with you that you personally will find helpful as well. So just a couple of little housekeeping pieces. All of the references for all of the webinar sessions will be in one document that will be pushed out relatively soon. And there were some questions that came up in the last sessions that we're still researching, so look forward to more information to come. Okay, so let's get started. What we're going to be looking at today is understanding the importance of self-care, ethical codes, looking at happiness studies. I'm going to introduce a little bit more about mindfulness, some tools you can take back, worksheets for your staff around CBT, looking at boundaries, kind of how we come home, transitioning, gratitude practice, and hopefully a whole host of tools and skills to support the well-being and resiliency, not just of your staff, but of you. So Patty and I have kind of created today to be something that you will maybe have a little experiment or experiential practice for yourself today. We want you to have something to take home and then things that you can start thinking about for your staff. So, oops, let's go back. Having a little bit of trouble with the PowerPoint. There we go. Hopefully it'll stay right there. Okay, so we talked about in the last couple of sessions, you know, the patient comes first, moving towards the patient comes second, and really starting to put our staff at the top of the priority of care. And then how do we really think about ourselves in that priority too? And I'm going to introduce this ethical code, but I think it's really important to start bringing in more tools and skills and how practitioners can think about their own self-care. We can't pour from an empty cup. And if you're ever on an airplane, you hear this cliche over and over and over again, but it is really true. We can't take care of our patients. We can't take care of our families if we're running on empty. And a lot of providers, we do tend to put others first. And just having a conversation to shift that, I think, it's so obvious, but it is something that I think resonates when people do hear this. So I want to ask the first poll question. I'll turn this over to you, Mariah.
Sure, thanks. And everyone should see that poll question on your screens now. Has your organization had a formal training or workshop on self-care for healthcare professionals? Just a quick yes or no, kind of test the room here. I'll leave this open for a few more seconds so we can get a few more voices on this question.
Oh, wow.
Great.
Interesting. Okay, so yeah, that's interesting information. I would not have expected it to be that high. So so this is really something to think about. I'm going to give you some kind of things to take back with you, even basic. And then we want to ask a second part of this question. So go ahead, Mariah.
Sure, thank you. Okay, so if you answered yes, how was it received? Was it enthusiastically, lukewarm, or it didn't go over so well?
And we'll kind of get to the importance of that answer shortly, but just really wanted to get an idea of what's been done and how it's gone over enthusiastically. Lukewarm, interesting. Okay. Yeah, and that really gets to the next slide. There we go. Proceeding with caution. I didn't ask the next question, but one question I might have asked was who conducted the session? And really, self-care is very personal because most people, and this is something we went over in the previous webinar, because most people feel like work is the #1 cause of their stress. When the organization then comes in saying, and you need to take care of yourself, it can feel disingenuous, it can feel burdensome, it can break that trust. So I say proceed with caution. Really, you know, if the employees aren't being heard about what isn't working in the organization, for them to, you know, do their own self-care that they might very well rightly know beautifully how to do, but just can't, maybe they can't get more flexible a work schedule, or the compensation isn't there, a whole host of things. If that isn't being heard, then this will fall flat. So I think thinking of outside resources or having maybe an internal behavioral health person that can be trained to facilitate. If it comes from HR, sometimes it just doesn't have the same pull as if a peer who really knows what it's like provides the training. So for those of you who answered, yes, we did it, it was lukewarm, just to kind of consider how it was being done. Okay. So that being said, Patty, do you want to say something about this slide?
Well, I think a photograph says 1,000 words. So that in itself is really representative of, I think, when you are just at a point of exhaustion and you really hit the ground. And we might even depend on a little coffee as a pick-me-up, but in her case, clearly that is not really being very effective. So I would hope that you will look at that and see if it might make you smile, but it also might be pretty alarming to think, is there any part of me that can associate with this photograph? So I'll let you interpret it for yourself, but hopefully it stands as an impact. And then obviously it's jumped quite a bit as and really the next slide, I think, which you'll see, is really around resilience and knowing that we are extraordinary in how we can be resilient in ourselves as an organization, as a company, and in every way. But we are very adaptive, and that gives us hope and optimism for what can shape up.
Yeah, and just also just the word resiliency, you know, there's been so much kind of conversation about how do we frame this idea of burnout in an organization. So we can't talk about burnout because it's too negative. Let's talk about resiliency. Then I've been to some workshops that said, well, we don't want to talk about resilient because people are going to wonder, well, why do I have to be resilient? Can't I just, you know, isn't it going to be enough to just do my job? So we're kind of at a language crossroads. How do we really start even talking about this? But really underneath it we are trying to bring forth some activities and tools and ways to think about being resilient, because we're all going to face stress. You know, the world is just a fast-moving, stressful place for most of us. Our work, home, you know, our whole lives. So how do we adapt and how do we bounce back? That's really about resilient. And you know, when I look at people that I meet every day in the clinic who come from really dire backgrounds, and you wonder, how did they get to where they are? What resiliency skills did they have to overcome so much? So a lot of science, a lot of talk about the word and concept resiliency. I wanted to bring in this idea, and I'm sorry, I'm having some trouble with the slides. I want to go into this standards of self-care. So every practice has a code of ethics, the Hippocratic Oath. behavioral health practitioners have a code of ethics, and to start talking about standards of self-care guidelines. This will be in the resources. But how do we really think about ourselves and our ethical code to self-care? We had a young MA just started our clinic, and I think it was her second day, and she talked about how she'd kind of been out all night and having fun, and in that morning she had drank 9 cups of coffee. So you can imagine kind of the level of performance that was happening for herself, and then how does that translate to our patients? So when we, I don't know if this kind of guideline should be in all of the helping professions, but it's maybe something to think about introducing. How do we even think about the ethics of self-care? And this whole document will be available to you, but it's something that you might think about introducing in your new hire orientation, or some kind of conversation early on about how we ethically think about self-care. And the two kind of areas of this are, doing no harm to myself when helping others. And the second thing is attending to your physical, social, emotional, and spiritual needs as a way of ensuring high quality service to those who look to you for support. So it's a good baseline. We're going to look, we're going to look a little bit at happiness, and we all probably have our ways and our ideas of happiness in our life, but just wanted to look at a study. So Mariah, can you take this question?
Sure. Just one more poll question for y'all today. Should be on your screen now. In the largest study on happiness, what do you think was the most important factor that contributed to lifelong happiness? You can select one: meaning in work, professional accomplishments, relationships, or physical health. I'll leave this open for a couple more seconds, give you a chance to think through your answer and give us your best guess. All right, close that and share it on our screens here.
Yeah. So most people have the answer. And Patty, why don't you talk about the study a little bit?
Okay, so just very quickly, it's one of the longest running studies that has ever been conducted. It started in 1938 from the Harvard School of Business, and they took a cross-section, actually it was mainly of men, to ask about what was the most important to them. Was it going to be their level of expertise in their areas of their work or their health, well-being, relationships, everything to do with part of their whole lifespan? And in a very succinctly, I would just say, right across the board, and it was over 400 people. Some of those people are still alive today. They did consistent questioning every month for the last number of years. And out of that study, over and over again, in the final analysis, relationships and trust with themselves and trust with another person was absolutely empirically proven that relationships are the #1 reason for people's happiness. Not money, not success, but really out of relationships. And that is really the cornerstone and the keystone to happiness.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that too, Patty. When Patty and I just did a session on self-care recently, and thinking about your own personal happiness tank. So, what are the things that when you're at your best, what are you doing? And so this is, there's a worksheet that goes along with this that'll be in your resources, but this is a really great conversation piece to have at a staff meeting, maybe at your all provider site meeting, but really starting to ask people what is there in their happiness tank? We look at physical, community, social, spiritual, sense of purpose, and we're going to focus a lot today on creativity. But what is it that makes you happy? What is it that when you're at your best, your life is full of? And actually, I was surprised by that study to find out how important relationships were in the long haul. I want to set up the creativity. So I had transparency, a pretty, you know, I live in the Northwest. It was a pretty dark winter. And, you know, I had a lot of the patients seemed to really be affected by the weather. A lot of difficult cases came about in kind of December, January, February. I was struggling myself. And, you know, while I have a pretty healthy idea of what my life should be doing this work, I was really struggling. And another friend of mine who's a creativity coach also kept saying, you have to come to my workshop on creativity. And, you know, I'm like, yeah. I was, you know, I used to be a filmmaker. I know all about creativity. And she kept kind of pestering me. And so finally I did. And it was fabulous. And it really opened up something to me. We went around and each had a painting, and then we got to move on to the next person's painting. And I noticed that everyone who had something orderly, I just went in and messed it up and was doing my, you know, Jackson Pollock. And what came to me after that was just, wow, I really feel like I'm kind of in a box. And the creative process just opened up so much for me. And, you know, while I do all these other things, it just showed me the creative process in a light that I hadn't seen before. And this is Patty's whole world, so her focus. So I really wanted to have her talk for a bit about creativity.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. I'm happy to hear that you had such a great experience in the midst of the depths of the winter here in the Pacific Northwest. So I just like to precede that by saying I have worked with hundreds of people in a life coaching capacity, but also in many other areas. And now I have come to the conclusion that creativity is a real key ingredient. It's not everything, but I think it's one very healthy, important part of well-being. And I like to call them kind of happiness chemicals and helping people thrive. That's the dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin and endorphins. And all of these can come about. And I can go on for hours and hours about all the research that has been done by many organizations and many health studies to show that creativity actually can change some of the brainwave patterns. And I think you might agree that music therapy can have a huge impact in decreasing anxiety, and that is literally in the physical being. Music changes, classical music in particular, which they use to calm people who have huge levels of anxiety. Art and creativity totally improves health. It is joyful, it's fun. I hold workshops in my home, in my studio, and I have people who come just to do finger painting or just to do freeform painting, and it almost takes you back to some childhood moments of memories of feeling no expectations of producing anything, but just really being in the moment. And sculpturing, having people use their hands to create things. Something transcends into the touch, into the space. And then we do dance and movement and exploration and writing. I hold writing workshops. So in those moments, people have an opportunity sometimes just to express things that are held inside them that words on paper seem to translate better. And for those people who don't feel quite so comfortable in the written word, they'll use colors, images. Some very abstract images can really help express a negative emotion, which words sometimes are hard to find. I offer ideas about any way that you can find your own particular muse, whether it's cooking or drawing or writing or even gardening. I'm sure all of you have some level of exploration, and I encourage that more and more, because I have found that the greatest release, the greatest way of getting stress, trauma, overburdened, when your inbox feels so completely spilling over, that the burden box can be emptied to some degree when the right brain is engaged in another different process. I think it's clear for many, and I know there's big organizations now who are investing an awful lot in creating a special room where people can go and just really download themselves, whether they just play games or just be in a whole different zone so that you can actually extract yourself. And I know that's probably very difficult in some of the health communities. You may not have those resources, but there's just little ways that that can be implemented, and we'll talk about those at the end of the session. But it's really about how you can exhale, where there's something in all of us that is, once given permission, we can, with the breath and with lightness and with play, it's bringing play back into the lives and bringing those happy emotions into our psyche, into our being. And even just looking at art, you don't even have to participate, because so many people just say, oh, I can't paint, I can't draw, I don't know how to do that. But even just appreciating beauty, even taking a flower. I did an Ikebana class last night, and it was just a really simple way of looking at space and looking at color and looking at the relationships of Mother Nature. And it's just a way of putting on different glasses and having a different perspective on how things can see, and then looking at the emotional relationship that happens once that you can just feel into a different way of seeing. And this might sound a little dreamy, but it's not. It really is the way that people have managed to walk through trauma. Even in, I think there's research that there was, even in traumatic times, if there is any ability for children to do art, or even adults to do art, even in the refugee camps, that has a huge impact on how they can translate from being in the trauma into finding just very few moments of some happiness, some creativity, which brings in those endorphins into a system. Even if it's only for a few seconds, it can have a huge balancing effect on that. So I suggest finding your own muse, and finding some way where that there's some form of therapy to relieve the tension. I love the picture of the dog playing the piano. That just, it makes me smile, but it really says something about that's how you can shift some of that neuroplasticity in the brain.
Yes, thank you. And you know, and we'll talk a little bit about the end. You know, some of these things can feel like, oh, one more thing, but you know, can there be little ways? You know, if you're a parent and you're going to be hanging out with your kids on the weekend, can you just buy some paints? Just do something simple. You know, so it doesn't have to be an expensive class away from home, but you know, you could bring sculpting clay into a staff meeting and just, you know, while people are talking, just have them be working on something. There's lots of different small ways to bring in these creative processes that I think could really add a lot of fun in the workday, and also get to some of the neuroscience that Patty's talking about. So that's a little bit about creativity. We're going to shift now to talk about another modality, if you will, that is being introduced into some organizations to deal with stress reduction, and that is, before we get into shifting, you know, really making it happen. So this was, as I mentioned, my downfall in all the things that I personally do about self-care. I think my biggest downfall was not scheduling it. And I think had I heeded that a little bit more when I got to the weekends, instead of, you know, getting into the mother guilt of have been away from my kids, boy, I really need to be with them a lot this weekend. If I had that yoga class scheduled, maybe I would have taken it more seriously and really gotten it scheduled. And I think so, even as you're sitting here now, if something came up when you were looking at that happiness tank that really you thought, gosh, I really want to do that, you might not have time in this minute, but just jot a note to yourself that, when I end this webinar, before I go get that cup of coffee or go to the restroom or have this conversation, I'm going to put this in my day timer. I'm going to put this in my Google Calendar and just get it scheduled. Okay, so then we're going to move on and we're going to talk a little bit about mindfulness, and I really do apologize for these slides. Having a little bit of trouble with the toggle. Okay, so I mentioned mindfulness a couple of different times. There was a study at the University of Rochester where they took 70 physicians and they put them through a mindfulness-based stress reduction program. And so this was evidence-based research. They did the 8-week, this is the full mindfulness-based stress reduction MBSR. That's kind of the gold standard of the MBSR program is 8 weeks, 10-month follow-up. They noticed improvements in well-being, increased patient-centered orientation, less isolation, more attentiveness to patient care, greater self-awareness. These are the things that they were measuring, were burnout, the Maslow inventory we mentioned in the first session, empathy scale, mood states. So a lot of organizations are starting to bring in a mindfulness program. It's not for everyone, it's not the silver bullet for everything, but it does have a lot of evidence behind why this is so helpful. And just a little bit about what mindfulness is. It's a process. It was not created by John Kabat-Zinn, but he created the mindfulness-based stress reduction program at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center in the late 70s. And I think this is why mindfulness has become so prevalent and so popular, because he took, his interest was in meditation. He was a molecular biologist working in a medical center with this practice of meditation, and he saw this suffering every day and wondered, how can I take this meditation practice and bring it into the mainstream, bring it into working with the real stressors and chronic disease and chronic pain. So actually it started with chronic pain. All the doctors in the medical center who kind of had thrown their hands up that they couldn't do anything more for some of their patients with chronic pain, they sent them down to the basement to the stress reduction program. And that started what is now a program that's in 450 medical centers, medical schools, Fortune 500 companies. So you see it all around. It doesn't have to be a big, expensive program. It can be something simple that, like I mentioned last time, somebody in your organization is trained in this, can work with practitioners for 10 minutes at lunch. It's an opt-in program always. But so the definition, paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. It's really about training the mind, turning off autopilot and being more in the present. One of my favorite personal mindfulness stories is walking around my house looking desperately for my phone, trying to get out the door. I looked in my purse, I looked in all the obvious places, and I was so frustrated. And the reason I couldn't find it was because I was talking on it. So that was a real mindless moment. And we're just talking about, knowing what we're doing when we're doing it. So we're training the mind. It's not new agey. It can be practiced whether you have a religious practice or not. It's not about not thinking or escaping. It's really about being aware and attentive moment to moment. It's not a relaxation technique, though it can be relaxing. And I say it's not mindfulness because people might have a misconception that it's, kind of navel gazing and self-absorbed. It's about understanding myself better so that I can connect more deeply with the other, with my patient, with my colleague, with my boss. It's really about deepening that connection between our deepest core humanity. And the science, I think, again, why it's become so accepted in so many organizations is there's been a surgence of science and research. I think maybe 10 years ago there were 10 research papers. Now there are about 450. And this is just one study looking at an area of the brain that's a center of thinking and emotion. And so the anterior cingulate cortex is more activated when somebody is practicing mindfulness. And why is that important? Well, for one reason, anxiety is the inability to self-regulate emotions. But when this part of the brain is more activated, we are more able to self-regulate. And that's why there's so much evidence about the impact of mindfulness practice on anxiety. So anxiety, stress in the workplace, it all makes sense if we can calm the mind, really kind of, we're talking about the central nervous system, finding ways to respond to stress rather than just react. I wanted to just offer, even in a webinar, just one little 30-second practice. So if you're sitting at your chair and you're willing to try something different, or maybe just take a break, I'm going to just walk you through a 1-minute exercise. So just feel your feet on the floor. Find something, just gentle gaze, looking down. Let your body kind of melt into the chair. I'm actually sitting here doing this along with you. And for just a few, not even a few moments, a few seconds, just become aware of the breath. In-breath and the out-breath. And noticing the thoughts racing in the mind, thoughts about what comes up next. What are we doing after this webinar? What are we having for dinner? Did I answer that email correctly? Any thought that comes in, we just acknowledge it. Let it be there. Let it go. Just a moment of just focusing on the breath. That was not a bell. And if we were in a group, I'd love to get feedback on just what a few seconds of just taking a couple moments. The beautiful thing about this practice is it's portable. It calms the central nervous system by activating the parasympathetic nervous system. It's bringing oxygen into the muscles that are kind of tense. If we even might have noticed in that moment, maybe some back tension or upper shoulders, a big place we carry tension, just getting oxygen into our muscles can be very healthy. So, there are a myriad of ways we can bring this practice into a workplace. This is just one technique that a lot of providers who've come back from different mindfulness, workshops. This is one practice that I've heard over and over again. They love learning. It's called 2 feet and a breath. And just when you're outside that patient room or your next meeting, just taking a minute, feeling your 2 feet on the floor, taking a breath, and proceeding. It sounds so simple, but really when we think of it just in terms of what it does to the central nervous system and kind of turning off the fight-flight response and getting into something that accesses, puts the cognitive center back online. A lot of kids are learning the flipping the brain, in their school, putting the executive functioning part of our brain back online when we've been activated. It really comes down to neuroscience and the brain. So when we can take that moment, accessing different neural pathways, it can have a big impact, even just a couple seconds. And then I'm just going to talk briefly, and these resources will be available to you. This is something that a behavioral health provider would be excellent at offering to your staff. So many of you are probably familiar with CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy for self-care. This comes from a great resource on the compassion fatigue workbook that I'll be sending along to you. But you know, CBT, basic CBT skills. You have a thought, creates an emotion, creates a behavior. So for example, if my thinking is, you know, I'm with a patient and I'm just feeling, maybe if I'm really aware, my thought is, I don't know the best way to help this patient. My emotion might be sadness, might be fear, might be increased anxiety. And then the behavior might be, you know, I just don't have the energy for the next patient, or I feel a little withdrawn. So CBT is really, you know, how our thoughts and emotions impact our behavior. So the next slide is just, sorry, let me go back. So the next slide, this is one of the forms that's in this workbook. It's called Overcoming Compassion Fatigue, a Practical Resilience Workbook. But this is an excellent exercise just to look at, you know, what is the stressful situation, starting to break it down. This is just part of the exercise. We're not going to do it today, but this is all online, all available. Some of it's online, some of it's in the workbook, but you know, you might carve out some hours of one of your behavioral health consultants and see if they'd be interested in offering this session, because a lot of what happens, you know, providers by nature are perfectionists, and there can be a lot of a self-criticism, kind of self-critical thoughts. And I see providers, you know, working way harder at the patient care than the patient. And so you start getting into, well, what are the emotions? What are the physical feelings in the body? I might be tense. I might have a stomach ache. You know, all those kind of physical symptoms of anxiety, key thoughts and beliefs. You know, how is this affecting my emotions? The core beliefs, and then we start in classic CBT. What's the evidence for this? What's the evidence against this thought? What is the adaptive language? And it can really take some of the negative self-talk that is ongoing. And again, when we're in these, you know, anybody can have these kind of thoughts, but it's really prevalent in providers. It comes a lot because of the medical training of just really excelling. And so we did this exercise together, and of a lot of the things that I've done, I found this to be incredibly helpful. You know, we sometimes feel this sense of powerlessness of you know, this constant revolving door of suffering coming in the door. And how do we frame that? How do we work with that? So how we think about our work and how we think about the suffering that we see can have a great impact on burnout. Okay, and so this is, I really apologize for the slides. This is a great little practice too. Transitions, coming home and being home. Many of you probably remember Mr. Rogers. He'd come in from his work day and have his cardigan that was now his home sweater. And so really having a Mr. Rogers moment where we're transitioning from work to home and making that almost a ritual. We have a provider in our clinic who I've been kind of keeping my eye on because I think she's a good candidate for burnout. And all of a sudden she showed up one week and she decided to start wearing her white lab coat. And that is her way of, at the end of the day, she takes off her white lab coat, she leaves it on her chair, and she's starting to go home more intentionally. I think she's getting some tools on how to maybe chart more effectively during the day, so she's not taking so much work home. But I was so delighted when I just saw her suddenly with this white coat on, and the reason why she was wearing it. So really being deliberate in leaving work at work as much as we possibly can, leaving devices away from our dinner tables, you know, our nights, getting them out of the bedroom, really being more intentional about what it is to be home. Patty, did you want to say a little bit about
a little
this?
bit? Yeah, thank you. I think that quote that you said of suffering is relentless, but beauty can be a real countermeasure to depression, a great antidote. So really bringing beauty into your life as much as possible. This is my dog and my garden, and it is the greatest RX for me, and I think that is a crucial piece to know, that appreciating beauty is a great kind of cure from trauma and stress and overburdened and overwork. And then gratitude. I think gratitude is huge, and I know that there was Dr. Emmons, I think it was the University of California, he did a study and showed that after a 10-week period where people wrote down about gratitude, after 10 weeks, they came to the realization that people were more optimistic about life, that having gratitude was a really increased so much physical and mental well-being. And gratitude is an emotion similar to appreciation.
Mm-hmm. And if I could add, one of the practitioners at our clinic who's, you know, she's kind of a type A, she's on it, she's very driven. She went to a session, and the one thing that she came out of it with was having a gratitude practice and just journaling each day 3 things I was grateful for. And it's just so interesting to see what people bring back that really can shift the way they see the work they do. And you know, all of this is good for business. When we look at how much stress is costing our organizations, it really is about good business. So if we are, you know, looking at this whole webinar series from the beginning, you know, really starting to recognize and talk about burnout, measure it, address it, change the way we practice as much as we can, change the culture, think about leadership that serves our employees, not just manages widgets, but serves the human beings who are there to take care of suffering human beings. This is not just, you know, as they say, a nice to have. It's a need to have, because it impacts the bottom line. When we think about the statistics to replace physicians, when we think about what turnover really costs, and what our health premiums are costing as an organization. So there's a million ways you could bring this into your organization. These were just a few. There's going to be a lot more tools coming, but maybe, Patty, you want to just share a few ideas you had about kind of even the way bringing some creativity into the workplace.
Sure, and I'm sure you other people have some other great inspiring ideas, but I have introduced into some nonprofit organizations an inspiration board that people can see it weekly, and people do have some incredible quotes that they gather from their friends, family, Facebook, wherever, and just pinning those on the board. Sometimes just a few words can have a real impact to help you shift out of a mindset. A photo board is always wonderful, lots of images, beauty, fun activities. Anybody that can pin things on there, photographs, once again, can have a really, just makes you smile. Encouraging listening, relaxing music. Definitely everybody with iPhones these days, or most people, or whatever gadget you have, relaxing music shifts that brainwave. And I think if it's possible within your organization that you have as administrators, just if there's any ways you can offer sleep management, relaxation techniques, there's an awful lot available online. I know Lisa and I are happy to help with anything if you need ideas on what to offer, the breathing exercises, the mindfulness, modeling exercise and healthy eating, supporting whatever you can do to model to help that, because I know that exercise is a crucial part of that too. I haven't covered that in there, but I'm sure that's been other parts of the webinars. Nourishment retreats, self-care plans, whatever you can do, have brainstorming sessions to come up with some ideas to help your staff. Taking breaks, much as possible. Coloring books, I think that's the greatest way. One of the biggest shifts that have occurred is recently people literally going back to coloring books, which seems very going back to primary school, kindergarten, but there's a real reason behind all that. And clearly, as we said before, relationships is a key piece of what keeps people happy, as in that Harvard research program. So anytime you can have an opportunity for a conversation and a positive conversation, that's really one of the greatest alleviates of stress as well. So I think that's what I have as an offer, and I'm really open to other ideas. And I welcome that. And I think we're just about to wrap up for some questions and answers. Thank you, Lisa.
Well, thank you, Patty. And I just wanted to say about this, I think about our lunchroom, and it's all, filled for all the pay for performance measures and, all the productivity. And while that's absolutely crucial to have, I started imagining what would a room be like that, when I come to take a break, it's filled with, pictures of my coworkers doing fun things or inspiring quotes. And I think there's some wisdom there, and something that we could really think about, that, we can take a break from the pay for performance measures for 10 minutes, for half an hour, and connect with another part of our life that, that brings us joy. We're in a workplace 40 hours a week, and that's a lot of our time. So can we have some images that that inspire us and nourish us, that are not just about the job performance. So with that, we say thank you for being part of this whole webinar. Happy to provide any feedback or any other information that you want. Keep the questions coming. We'll be hopefully with Mariah and Suzanne back and forth if there's more that's coming up. But just want to turn it over for questions and answers.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much for a great presentation and a great series on the whole. Anybody has questions, feel free to put them into the questions box there. I'd love to see if anybody has their own personal tips and tricks for self-care moment. We pop those in the chat box just to share those as we close out our webinar here. I did have one question. It just, again, with the tips, if you know of any apps or websites to check out of good places to start thinking about ways to bring self-care, just little moments of self-care into your daily routine. And I've seen a few ads for them out there. This isn't a paid endorsement or anything, but if either of you have any recommendations.
Patty, I'll ask you too. A lot of people, at least in the mindfulness, when they're looking for that, a lot of people are turning to an app called Headspace, which has really great quick little meditations, inspirational quotes, practices. And another one is called Insight Timer, which has quite a few little short practices as well. And do you have ideas, Patty?
Well, I use the Insight Timer as myself. I also have, it comes in my email every day. It's TUT, T-U-T. And they're little quotes from a very clever man who does inspiration to you personally. And it's just, I wake up every morning and there's my little TUT prompt. And it makes me realize how valuable I am and where my place is in the universe. And they're always really positive and really uplifting. So it's TUT, and I'm happy to send that to you so people can resource that from themselves. But it's a nice, just a little kickstart to the morning. And I'm sure there's a whole host of other things, but that's what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And again, along those lines, the example, the ethical code of that you mentioned earlier on in the presentation that people could kind of work with to start.
Yes, I'll have that Yep, I'll have that online. That'll be in the resources.
I think I'm not seeing any questions coming in yet, so I'll just get going in our kind of wrap up section here. Thank you both for this webinar. It was the final webinar in our 5-part series that we've been doing over the last few weeks here. As with all the previous sessions, we will be emailing out links to the recording of this session and the slides. If you'd like to access them right now, we have them available in the Handouts tab on your GoToWebinar panel on your screen, so you can download this here, or we'll send them to you by email. They will also be available on our website, along with a bunch of other resources related to burnout, and as Lisa mentioned, the cost of turnover, to highlight how important that is at your organization.
And Mariah, did you want to say something
Yeah.
about the tool and the timing of that as well?
Absolutely, yeah. We have a tool in the works to kind of take a look at where your organization stands as it goes with burnout, to highlight where you're doing well or where maybe you want to take a little bit more look, and that tool will also connect you with more resources, resources galore. So we're still in the process of working on that tool right now, but we hope to have that out to you towards the end of the summer, and that will come out through our website. It'll be in our newsletter, which you can also sign up for on our website, and we'll also be announcing that on Twitter. Love to get in touch with anybody about that ahead of time and to gauge your interest there.
Okay, and also just wanted to say before we close, to all of you who are still left, make sure you get out your Google calendars and schedule that one thing, just that one thing.
Absolutely.
Yes, and I say go find any tiny little piece of creativity, whatever it might be, and just let yourself explore that, and just check in with the mindful self to see if you can make that shift, and if that will help you, help your well-being, help the organization, help clients, and help patients, and just have it become a really community piece that will bring some life voice and happy chemicals into your world.
All right, that's absolutely wonderful. Thank you both for today, and thank you everybody on the line. We look forward to working with you in the future. Thanks. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks.